Zefka pressed his six-fingered hand against the cold metal of the escape pod's window, watching his homeworld of Vorthak shrink into a dying ember behind him. The once blue oceans had turned to rust, and the green continents were now scarred brown wastelands. His people, the Vorthani, had finally accepted what their scientists had been saying for decades. Their world was beyond saving. The atmospheric processors had failed 3 cycles ago. The magnetic field generators that protected them from solar radiation were breaking down one by one. Even their most advanced technology couldn't reverse the damage they had done to their planet over thousands of years of industrial growth. The Council of Elders had made the hardest decision in their species' history: evacuation. Zefka was part of the Advance Scout Division, sent to find new worlds suitable for colonization. His sleek silver ship, the Wanderer, was equipped with the most sophisticated scanning equipment the Vorthani had ever built. But as he drifted through the void of space, he couldn't shake the feeling that his people might be too late. How many other species had fled dying worlds, only to find nowhere to go? The ship's navigation computer chirped softly, indicating they were approaching the outer edge of a promising solar system. Zefka had been traveling for 6 months, checking planet after planet, finding only barren rocks or worlds already claimed by other species. This system showed promise, though. The 3rd planet from its yellow star registered as having water, oxygen, and complex life forms. As the Wanderer approached the blue-green world, Zefka's excitement grew. The planet was beautiful, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans. The continents were covered in green vegetation, and the atmospheric readings showed perfect conditions for Vorthani life. His elongated heart organ pumped faster as he prepared to begin detailed scans. But then his instruments detected something unexpected: artificial structures, cities, technology. This world wasn't uninhabited. Zefka's hope deflated like a punctured air bladder. The planet was already occupied by an intelligent species. His training told him to move on, to find an empty world rather than risk conflict with an established civilization. But something made him pause. The energy signatures from the planet were strange. Unlike most spacefaring civilizations he had encountered, these beings seemed to use primitive chemical propulsion and basic electromagnetic communications. They were barely beyond their own atmosphere. Curiosity overtook caution. Zefka decided to observe these creatures from a safe distance. He positioned his ship in the shadow of the planet's larger moon and activated the long-range sensors. What he saw confused him greatly. The dominant species appeared to be bipedal mammals with only 4 limbs and primitive sensory organs. They had no natural armor, no venomous spines, no electromagnetic field generation abilities. They seemed remarkably fragile compared to most intelligent life he had encountered. Yet somehow, these weak creatures had managed to build cities, develop technology, and spread across their entire planet. Even more puzzling, they seemed to be constantly fighting each other. Zefka's sensors detected weapons fire, explosions, and troop movements in dozens of locations across the planet. These humans, as he learned they called themselves, were engaged in what appeared to be perpetual warfare. The Vorthani had experienced conflicts in their past, but they had evolved beyond such primitive behavior thousands of years ago. Violence was inefficient, wasteful, and counterproductive to species survival. Yet these humans seemed to thrive on it, even as it clearly hindered their technological and social development. Zefka spent several days studying their communications, slowly learning their various languages through his ship's translation protocols. What he discovered disturbed him. The humans weren't just fighting over resources or territory. They were fighting over ideas, beliefs, and concepts that seemed abstract and meaningless. They called these conflicts wars, and they appeared to be proud of their ability to wage them. But then something happened that changed everything. While monitoring a particularly intense conflict in what the humans called the Eastern Front, Zefka witnessed something that made no sense according to everything he understood about warfare and survival. A small unit of human soldiers had been surrounded by enemy forces in a bombed-out building. They were outnumbered 10-1, with no hope of rescue or escape. By all logical calculations, they should have surrendered to preserve their lives. Instead, they continued fighting. But that wasn't the strange part. What shocked Zefka was that one of the soldiers, a young female barely past adolescence, used her own body to shield a wounded comrade from an explosion. She died instantly, saving someone who would likely die anyway within hours. Zefka stared at the sensor readings, running the data through his analytical processors multiple times. The action made no evolutionary sense. The female had sacrificed her genetic line to temporarily preserve someone with minimal survival probability. It was illogical, inefficient, and completely contrary to natural selection principles. Yet as he continued watching, he saw it happen again and again. Humans throwing themselves into danger to protect others, sharing their limited rations with wounded enemies, carrying injured comrades when doing so slowed their own escape. Medical personnel rushing into active combat zones to treat the wounded, regardless of which side they belonged to. Zefka's worldview began to crack. According to Vorthani science, intelligent life evolved through competition, survival of the fittest, and rational decision-making. Successful species thrived by maximizing individual survival probability and genetic propagation. Yet these humans seemed to operate on principles that directly contradicted those fundamental laws. He decided he needed to understand more. Against all protocols, Zefka programmed his ship to descend into the planet's atmosphere. He would observe these creatures more closely, perhaps even make contact. His people's survival might depend on understanding what made these impossible beings function. As the Wanderer slipped through the clouds toward the surface of Earth, Zefka couldn't know that he was about to witness something that would forever change not just his understanding of humanity, but his understanding of what it truly meant to be alive in the universe. Zefka landed his ship in a dense forest, far from human settlements but close enough to observe their behavior. He activated his personal cloaking device, a technology that bent light around his form, making him invisible to primitive human vision. His plan was simple: observe, analyze, and report back to the Vorthani fleet about these strange creatures. He chose to study a battlefield where human forces had been fighting for weeks over control of a strategic mountain pass. The terrain was scarred with craters and littered with the remnants of their crude but effective weapons. What he witnessed in the following days challenged everything he thought he knew about intelligent life. On his first night of observation, Zefka watched a human patrol discover 3 enemy soldiers trapped under debris from a collapsed bunker. According to military logic, the patrol should have either eliminated the trapped enemies or left them to die. Instead, the humans spent 4 hours carefully digging them out, sharing their medical supplies and even their food rations. When Zefka analyzed the decision through Vorthani strategic calculations, it made no sense. These humans had aided individuals who would return to fight against them as soon as they recovered. They had wasted precious resources and exposed themselves to danger for zero tactical advantage. But the humans didn't seem to calculate decisions the way Vorthani did. They appeared to operate on something they called conscience, an internal mechanism that compelled them to help others regardless of personal cost or logical benefit. Zefka had no equivalent concept in his language or culture. The next day brought even more confusing observations. A human medic named Sarah, whom Zefka had been tracking, ran across open ground under heavy fire to reach a wounded enemy soldier. She was shot twice during the rescue attempt, but continued crawling toward the injured man. When she reached him, she used her last medical kit to treat his wounds, even though she was bleeding badly herself. Other humans saw what she had done and risked their own lives to rescue both the medic and the enemy soldier. During the evacuation, Zefka heard them talking. The wounded enemy soldier spoke a different language, belonged to a different culture, and had been trying to kill them just hours earlier. Yet the humans treated him with the same care they showed their own wounded. Zefka's analytical mind struggled to process this behavior. In Vorthani society, resources were allocated based on contribution potential and genetic value. Medical treatment was prioritized for those most likely to survive and contribute to species advancement. These humans seemed to provide care based on need alone, regardless of usefulness or survival probability. As the week progressed, Zefka documented dozens of similar incidents. He watched human soldiers share their last water with prisoners. He saw them divert from important missions to evacuate civilians from combat zones. He observed enemy forces who had been fighting brutally call temporary truces to allow medical teams to collect the wounded from both sides. But the incident that truly shattered his understanding happened on the 7th day of observation. A massive artillery bombardment had collapsed part of the mountain, trapping a mixed group of soldiers from both sides in a cave system. Instead of leaving their enemies to die, both human factions worked together for 18 hours to dig them out. Zefka watched in amazement as soldiers who had been killing each other that morning now coordinated rescue efforts, shared equipment, and risked cave-ins to save everyone trapped below. When they finally broke through, the first person pulled from the rubble was an enemy commander who had been leading attacks against the rescuers' positions just days earlier. The commander was unconscious and badly injured. Any rational species would have let him die, or at least ensured he couldn't return to command enemy forces. Instead, the humans rushed him to their best medical facility and assigned their most skilled doctors to save his life. That night, Zefka sat in his concealed ship, staring at his notes. Everything he had observed violated basic principles of evolution, survival, and rational behavior. Yet somehow, these irrational actions seemed to make the humans stronger, not weaker. Their willingness to sacrifice for others created bonds of trust and cooperation that enhanced their collective survival capabilities. He decided to test his hypothesis by observing human civilians in a nearby town that had been recently liberated from enemy occupation. What he found there was even more incomprehensible. The town's inhabitants had been brutally oppressed by occupying forces for months. Many had lost family members, homes, and livelihoods. Zefka expected to see revenge killings, looting, and chaos. Instead, he witnessed something unprecedented in his experience with intelligent species. The freed humans immediately began organizing to help their former oppressors. Enemy soldiers who had been abandoned by their retreating army were given food and medical care. Collaborators who had aided the occupation were forgiven and reintegrated into the community. Most shocking of all, the humans actively worked to rebuild infrastructure that would benefit everyone, including those who had worked against them. An elderly human woman named Elena particularly fascinated Zefka. Her son had been executed by occupying forces just weeks earlier. Yet when she found an enemy soldier hiding in her basement, wounded and terrified, she bandaged his injuries and fed him soup. Zefka's translation device picked up their conversation. "Why are you helping me?" the soldier asked in broken local dialect. "Your people must hate us." Elena looked at him with tired but kind eyes. "You're just a boy, far from home. Hate won't bring my son back, and it won't heal this world, but maybe kindness will." This concept of forgiveness was completely alien to Zefka. Vorthani society was built on precise calculations of debt and credit, action and consequence. Crimes were punished with mathematical precision to maintain social order. But these humans seemed capable of something his people had never developed: the ability to break cycles of retaliation through conscious choice. Over the following weeks, Zefka watched the town rebuild itself faster and more efficiently than his models predicted possible. The combination of former enemies working together created a hybrid vigor that enhanced everyone's capabilities. Their irrational compassion had produced supremely rational results. But Zefka's observations were interrupted by urgent communications from the Vorthani fleet. The evacuation from their homeworld was accelerating. Environmental collapse was happening faster than predicted, and millions of Vorthani needed new homes immediately. The advanced scouts had found several marginally suitable worlds, but none could support their entire population. As Zefka prepared to report his findings, he faced an impossible choice. Earth could easily support Vorthani colonies, but it was already inhabited by these remarkable humans. His people's survival might require displacing or destroying a species that had shown him the most extraordinary behavior he had ever witnessed. He looked at his comprehensive files on human capability. Their primitive weapons wouldn't stand a chance against Vorthani technology. Their lack of unified planetary government made them vulnerable to divide-and-conquer tactics. From a purely military perspective, conquest would be swift and decisive, but something had changed in Zefka during his weeks of observation. The humans' inexplicable kindness had infected him with concepts his species had no words for. He found himself unable to recommend actions that would harm these incredible beings, even to save his own people. As he prepared his final report to the Vorthani fleet, Zefka realized that his encounter with humanity had transformed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The question was no longer whether the Vorthani could take this world, but whether they deserved to, and what they might learn from these impossible creatures who turned weakness into strength through the simple act of caring for others. Zefka stared at the blank transmission screen for hours before finally beginning his report to the Vorthani High Command. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he make them understand that these fragile humans possessed something far more valuable than their planet? They had discovered the secret to transcending their biological limitations through conscious choice. "High Command," he began, "I have located a suitable world for colonization. However, there are complications that require immediate council attention." The response came within hours. Fleet Admiral Korth Za's image materialized on the communication display, his 4 eyes gleaming with desperate hope. Behind him, Zefka could see the bridge of the massive colony ship, Exodus, filled with millions of Vorthani refugees. "Scout Zefka, we need coordinates immediately. Our homeworld has less than 6 cycles remaining. Have you found us a new home?" Zefka took a deep breath through his gill slits. "Yes, Admiral. But the planet is inhabited by a species that may change everything we understand about intelligent life." For the next hour, Zefka transmitted his observations, his analysis, and most importantly, his recordings of human behavior. He watched Admiral Korth Za's expression change from impatience to confusion to outright disbelief. "These creatures you describe are clearly defective," the Admiral finally responded. "No rational species sacrifices optimal survival choices for irrational emotional responses. You've been in isolation too long, Scout. We'll arrive within 10 cycles and establish colonies in uninhabited regions. These humans can adapt or relocate." "Admiral, you don't understand. Their apparent irrationality is actually a higher form of intelligence. They've evolved beyond pure survival calculus into something that makes them collectively stronger than the sum of their individual capabilities." But the transmission was already ending. The Vorthani fleet was coming, and they saw humans as nothing more than primitive obstacles to their own survival. Zefka faced the hardest decision of his life. He could hide his ship and wait for his people to arrive, knowing that human civilization would likely be destroyed in the process. Or he could do something unprecedented in Vorthani history, warn the inhabitants about what was coming. The choice became clear when he witnessed one final human interaction that crystallized everything he had learned. A young human soldier named Marcus was dying from wounds received while protecting a school full of children during an enemy air raid. As the medic worked frantically to save him, Marcus kept asking about the children's safety. "Did they all get out?" he whispered through bloody lips. "The little girl with the red shoes? Did she make it to the shelter?" The medic nodded, tears streaming down her face. "They're all safe. You saved them." Marcus smiled and closed his eyes. "Good. That's good." He died with that smile on his face, completely at peace, because strangers' children would live to see another day. In that moment, Zefka understood what he had been observing. The humans had evolved the ability to find their own survival in the survival of others. They had transcended individual existence and become something greater. That night, Zefka did something that violated every protocol in Vorthani military doctrine. He deactivated his cloaking device and walked into the human military camp. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Alarms blared, weapons were raised, and within seconds he was surrounded by armed soldiers. But instead of opening fire, they held their position and shouted questions at him in various languages. "I come in peace," Zefka said in perfect English, his translation device having perfected the language during his observation period. "I need to speak with your leaders about a threat to your world." What followed was the most extraordinary negotiation in the history of two species. Despite having every reason to treat him as an enemy, the humans listened to his warnings. When he explained about the incoming Vorthani fleet, their first concern wasn't military preparation. It was whether his people could be helped to find a peaceful solution. General Patricia Hayes, the human commander who became Zefka's primary contact, asked questions that no Vorthani leader would have considered. "Are your people suffering? How can we help them without losing our own world? Is there a way for both species to benefit?" Zefka found himself working with human scientists and strategists to develop something unprecedented, a first contact protocol based on mutual aid rather than conquest. The humans proposed sharing their world, offering uninhabited regions for Vorthani settlements in exchange for technological knowledge that could help both species thrive. When the Vorthani fleet arrived, they found something no one expected. Instead of a defenseless planet ripe for conquest, they encountered a unified human defense force working alongside Zefka to facilitate peaceful contact. Admiral Korth Zah's initial fury at what he saw as Zefka's betrayal turned to confusion when human representatives requested permission to send humanitarian aid to the Vorthani refugees. They offered food, medical supplies, and temporary shelter while negotiations proceeded. "Why would they help us?" the Admiral asked during a private communication with Zefka. "We came here to take their world." "Because they've evolved beyond zero-sum thinking," Zefka replied. "They understand that everyone's survival is enhanced when everyone cooperates." The negotiations that followed challenged both species to grow beyond their limitations. Humans had to overcome their instinctive fear of alien invasion, while Vorthani had to abandon their belief that survival required conquest. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when conflict seemed inevitable. But gradually, something beautiful began to emerge. Vorthani medical technology helped cure diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia. Human agricultural techniques, refined by their need to feed billions on limited land, helped the Vorthani establish sustainable colonies. Most importantly, Vorthani rationality, combined with human compassion, created hybrid approaches to problem-solving that neither species could have achieved alone. Zefka became the first Vorthani ambassador to humanity, spending his time translating not just languages, but entire ways of thinking between the two species. He watched Vorthani scientists learn to consider emotional factors in their calculations, while human leaders discovered the power of logical long-term planning. The most profound change happened to Zefka himself. Living among humans had taught him that survival wasn't just about preserving biological functions. It was about preserving meaning, hope, and connection. He had fled his dying world as a desperate refugee, but he had found something far more valuable than a new home. Years later, as he stood in the memorial garden that humans and Vorthani had built together to honor those lost during the transition, Zefka reflected on what he had learned. The humans hadn't just saved his people, they had shown them a better way to be alive. A young human child ran up to him, one of many who had grown up in the integrated settlements where both species lived side by side. "Uncle Zefka," she called him, using the affectionate title the human children had given him. "Will you tell us the story again about how you learned to be brave?" Zefka knelt down to her level, his alien features now familiar and loved by an entire generation of human children. "I wasn't brave," he said gently. "Your people taught me that real courage isn't about being strong enough to survive. It's about being wise enough to help others thrive." As the sun set over their shared world, Zefka watched human and Vorthani families gathering for their evening meals together, their children playing games that combined traditions from both cultures. He had come to Earth looking for a place his people could survive. Instead, he had discovered something infinitely more precious, a way for all beings to truly live. The dying world he had fled was gone forever, but from its ashes had grown something neither species could have achieved alone. The humans had shown them that the greatest strength wasn't in conquest, but in the conscious choice to lift others up, even at personal cost. And in learning that lesson, both species had found their true home among the stars.